This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. After holding an emergency meeting over President Biden's ailing candidacy on Tuesday, House Democrats walked out of the gathering largely convinced that Biden will survive. Most Democrats now appear to have accepted this eventuality, even as many also seem fairly convinced that he will lose to Donald Trump in November. What happened here exactly? We don't think this is quite over yet. There are still scenarios in which Biden could end up stepping aside, but as of now, this is mostly being portrayed in the press as a sign that Democrats just dutifully fell in line behind their leader or that they didn't want to take him on publicly. We think the story is far more complex than that. And on that score, the American Prospect's David Dayen has a good new piece called Why the Bid to Push Out Biden is Losing. So he and I are going to try to parse through all these real complexities right here, right now. Great to have you on, David.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Let's just step back and set the scene. A few days ago, it looked as if enough Democrats might privately tell Biden that his chances of winning have evaporated after that awful debate performance, perhaps inducing him to step aside, or that Democrats might mobilize to try and oust him if necessary. In that case, we'd all but certainly have Kamala Harris as the nominee, though I suppose some kind of open process would be conceivable. But your argument is that ultimately, Biden has been able to largely shut down this movement because it really is in some sense a movement of elites, of worried donors and so forth. How do you understand what happened here?
Obviously, we all saw what happened a couple of weeks ago at the debate, and that stirred just a great deal of alarm, I think, among the public in general and Democrats in particular, who are really worried about the prospect of a second Trump administration. But the way it kind of manifested was, as you say, through elite columnists, pundits, and donors. And those were the key messengers. We weren't hearing from people on the street who were saying, I'm very concerned about Biden. I don't know if he's going to be able to survive, and be a firm chief executive for another 4 years. We were hearing this from Rob Reiner. We were hearing this from, Ezra Klein. We were hearing this from the New Republic. I mean, I'm not immune either. We were hearing it from the American Prospect. So, but I think that was a very easy message for Joe Biden to rebut. And the way that he's done it is kind of a way that he has embarked on throughout his career. You guys, you elites have always counted me out. I'm Scranton Joe. This is Main Street versus Wall Street. This is, you counted me out in 2016. You counted me out in 2020. You counted me out in 2022. And here I am still standing. It's a message that at least was compelling enough, regardless of the messenger, for it to be easily kind of put aside. And there wasn't really any kind of mass mobilization of ordinary people to call their representatives, to call the White House, to do whatever felt needed to be done to make that persuasion a little look less like a bunch of donors freaking out and more like an actual, expressed will of the people.
Very true. I mean, I should probably put my cards on the table here and say that at this point, I think the party would probably be better off with Harris as the nominee for a bunch of reasons. And the thing is, most of the reporting shows that a lot of House Democrats appear to think Biden is very deeply damaged or even can't win. And I want to ask you this, David. I mean, why, given that genuine belief among Democrats, hasn't there been a real effort by them to try to create public pressure on Biden to get out? I mean, why isn't there such an effort if they themselves think they're going to lose with Biden at the top of the ticket and fear they're going to lose democracy if Trump wins? It's arguably kind of irresponsible, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very insular debate. I mean, you do not see people sort of appealing to their districts and appealing to their constituents and having it out that way. Politicians make political calculations, right? And there was sort of this kind of mass staring contest, I think, going on in the House of Representatives, where nobody wanted to be sort of the first one to step out. And even after a few did, people like Lloyd Doggett and Raul Grijalva and some others, there wasn't enough safety in numbers to get sort of a mass group of people. Look, I mean, these are hard conversations to have. Like, they're hard conversations to have in our own families when you have people who, maybe we want to not have them live on their own anymore or things like that. It's very difficult to say that you, especially in this case, someone who's been in politics for 50 years, that they don't have the ability to be in politics anymore. That's not something that anyone's going to sort of react well to. And you couldn't do it in a piecemeal fashion that looked way too much like almost that you were sort of weaponizing and getting leverage over the president. It just looked a little bit unseemly, I think. And so that was another problem.
I'll tell you what I've taken from my conversations with House Democrats and aides and so forth. I keep hearing that after private conversations with the president's top advisors, Dems have come away deeply persuaded that there's just really nothing that will get Biden to step down. So in their calculus, at a certain point, continuing with this actually harms the chances of winning in November. I mean, I think this is at least part of what explains, say, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others sort of suddenly coming out and saying Biden is our nominee and it's time to unite behind him. And this is kind of, isn't this, David, how Biden is defeating, at least for now, the push to oust him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely part of it. Look, if you make the calculation that this guy really is he's not going to be counted out. He sees the people who are asking him to leave as people who he has a grudge against, people who think they're better than him. It's just going to get his back up more. Then at that point, you make the calculation. Well, everyone who says he should get out of the race is giving fodder to the other side, right? We're going to see campaign ads that say Lloyd Doggett said that Joe Biden should get out of the race, right? So you either harm him more, wound him more, make him a weaker candidate than he already is. And to some people, he's already far too weak to maintain this campaign. Or you sort of rally behind him and behind the ideas and maybe behind just sort of having a national front against Trump. So, yeah, I think that's definitely part of the dynamic in thinking about whether there was any way to do this. I mean, as soon as the debate ended, I thought there's only one person that's really going to have the leverage to get Biden out of the race, and it's Jill Biden.
Yeah.
And when Jill Biden sort of showed by her words and her actions that she was going to be four square behind the president, I mean, the person who's most plugged into Biden world that I know told me at that point, it's going to take a tank to get him out of the race. And so once you make that, sort of come to terms with that in your mind, then yeah, you're like, if you're an AOC or a Bernie Sanders, your calculation is, well, I don't want Donald Trump to run. I don't want him to win. And so this is going to be my only opportunity, is to just sort of get in line behind Biden.
It's not a crazy calculation. I mean, people on Twitter and so forth are sort of treating it as like a big nothing burger to push out a sitting president. I mean, this is. I mean, the guy
has been done a lot before. Yeah,
right. It's a pretty major thing. And if he doesn't want to go, I mean, who's some backbench House member to tell him that he's supposed to go? I mean,
right. It's a larger point, though, that, there was a time in the Democratic Party when the power bases were largely located in mass membership organizations, unions. The civil rights movement was self-funded. You had dues-paying organizations, whether it was Acorn or some of these other organizations. And now you don't have that. And so when you talk about the Democratic Party, what you're really talking about is a bunch of elites and largely a bunch of donors. And the problem is there's no real legitimacy to deposing a sitting president unless it comes from a bottom-up sort of understanding. And those mass membership organizations are the sort of representatives in the room of millions and millions of people. And we don't have that in the Democratic Party anymore.
I want to try to bear down on that point because it's fascinating. There's almost like a split screen here when it comes to what the Democratic base wants, right? So certain polls show that, I don't know, around half of Democrats don't think Biden is really fit to run. They think he's too old to run. There's, pretty large percentages of Democrats would like to see another candidate. But you're identifying a problem, which is that there's not really an institutional channel for that to actually get kind of mobilized, leverage, and heard. And that seems to me to be a pretty major problem. Like, you've got this sort of dispirited, demobilized mass electorate that has its feelings about Biden, but at the same time, these people's representatives are sort of hamstrung and can't really speak for them because nobody's kind of, able to corral this kind of popular sentiment in any sense. What does this all mean?
It's a larger problem that nobody's in the room for the interests of the public. And it's a problem that actually goes beyond this particular issue, right? Yeah. We've seen for years these studies that say, who do politicians really listen to? What issues get raised to the attention of Washington and what don't? And it's largely the interests of the wealthy and the well-connected. And the way that works in the Democratic Party is there are a bunch of foundations that fund grassroots organizations that may have connections to a membership and maybe don't, but they exist on the backs of their wealthy donors, really. And it even subconsciously, it guides their decision making. And so I think the issue is we don't have an Americans for Democratic Action like we did in the 1940s and 50s. We don't have a vibrant labor movement. You'll notice that not one labor leader has come out and said anything about whether or not Biden should step aside from the race.
I want to bring that up with you, David. That's really important, right? Because the internal party dynamics are getting really kind of opaque to me, right? It was a big deal when Congressional Black Caucus leaders said they were sticking with Biden. I think they obviously genuinely represent a massive constituency in the Democratic Party, of course. But then there's labor. Labor doesn't represent what it used to among Democrats. And at the same time, they still wield a fair amount of power. So I'm kind of watching what labor does in the next few days. They do sort of seem kind of hamstrung in a way that labor used to not be. Am I right about that?
Yeah, on Tuesday afternoon, the Communications Workers of America, one of the largest unions that we have, redoubled its support for Joe Biden. Most of them said nothing. That to the extent that we've had anything, it's been from CWA, and then the AFL-CIO endorsed Biden the earliest that they've ever endorsed a political candidate in their history. There's been kind of obviously Biden's been very good for the labor movement. He's appointed a very strong National Labor Relations Board. He's walked a picket line. He's done a lot for labor, and labor is, likely seeing that they don't want to get involved in this food fight with someone that they think has been a good champion of theirs.
Right.
So that's kind of the sort of the particulars of this dynamic. But what I'm saying is sort of in a larger kind of a larger sense, that what is lacking, I think, in the Democratic Party, and it's one reason why maybe the Sanders movement was bigger than people would have thought, say, in 2016, is that there isn't this sort of way to connect ordinary people to the apparatuses of policymaking in Democratic politics. And, to the extent that the Bernie campaign was a way to do that, I think that's why it was successful beyond even maybe what Sanders thought initially in 2016. So I think it's a problem for our politics as much as anything.
So I think what you're saying here kind of gets at the dark side of the story of Biden surviving, presuming he does survive, right? On a superficial level, he's kind of saying, okay, this is just an elite movement to oust me, which is actually, as you say, sort of true. But the reason it's true is because the people of the Democratic Party don't have channels to express themselves, and there isn't really a mechanism to mobilize them. And that's a negative story. That's something nobody should celebrate.
No, it is something nobody should celebrate. And, it sort of creates situations where in moments like these, when big decisions have to be made, there's really no mechanism to do it. There isn't a mechanism to sort of take the temperature of the Democratic Party outside of polling and things like that, which obviously the Biden campaign has sort of ignored or dismissed a lot of the polling that has gone on this. Outside of that, there is no mechanism. And I'm trying to think about how what the parallel to this would be on the right. The mechanisms largely exist through these top-down channels, like Breitbart and talk radio and Fox News. That's the way that the will of the Republican electorate is sort of expressed. We don't have that. Maybe it's a good thing we don't have it to the extent that it exists on the right, but it's not necessarily a good thing that there aren't sort of mass membership organizations that allow for representation in these very important debates and conversations.
100%. By the way, I should say that Mickey Sherrill, a congresswoman, just came out and said it's time for Biden to step aside, which is a fairly big deal. She's a, prominent national security Democrat type. I believe she was elected in the class of 2018, one of Pelosi's picks for that.
Yeah, and she's likely to run for governor of New Jersey in 2025. So someone who's going to be stepping outside of Congress and have to face voters in a short period of time.
Right. And so she recognizes that she can't just line up behind Biden if she's going to have to face a general election.
Greg, the other dark side of this is the question of, well, what now? So the Biden campaign is down by anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 points. They've had the entire spring and summer on the air in battleground states by themselves, and now the Trump campaign is going to go in for the kill and start spending their money to compete with him on the air. The media story is going to be, a day is not going to go by in this race without this story of Biden's age being at top of mind. It's not something that you can just turn the page on. Every single time he goes out for a campaign speech, every interview, it's going to be dissected. It's going to be sliced and diced to look for any kind of flaws. And so what is the Biden campaign's strategy to counteract all this, other than saying, shut up, I'm the nominee, and let's go win together?
I agree. I mean, what I wrote right after the debate is that there's zero reason to have any confidence that Biden has what it takes to avoid another screw up of this magnitude between now and Election Day. And he's got to be not exactly perfect, but pretty damn good all the way out. And what drives me nuts is that the Biden campaign just isn't taking any of this seriously. It's just kind of bulldozing through everybody, and it's not making a case to people, an affirmative case that here's how we get this back. We know we're in a hole. Here's how we get these voters back. We have a plan to do it. Here's what it is. And I guess maybe to tie this back to what we've been talking about, they just don't feel obliged to do that because they can just kind of, he can just win by staying.
Well, they're putting their status in the institution above the status of the nation as a whole. They want to maintain power within the institution, and they have a path to do that. But that doesn't mean they have a path to victory. Another kind of under the radar thing is because the Commission for Presidential Debates process has gone by the wayside, it means that between now and November, there's only scheduled to be one more debate. We'll see if Trump even bothers with that debate because he's already won. And once you're winning, you don't necessarily need to debate again. but maybe he'll take the chance of Biden having another slip up, and maybe he'll do it. Under the Commission for Presidential Debate system, there was a vice presidential debate. That's not scheduled right now. The only sort of major opportunity for someone other than Joe Biden to take the stage and tell the Joe Biden story and tell the agenda story is gone. That we're not going to have that. Kamala Harris is not going to be on a debate stage with whoever the Trump vice presidential nominee is. And so it's only Biden. He's got only one more shot in September. And so now, if you thought the June debate was high stakes, what does that September debate looks like if it's even carried off?
I really shudder at that one. I do want to say, though, I don't know if this thing is completely over yet. Let me run this by you. It feels to me like the deadline is really the week after the Republican convention. If Biden makes another catastrophic screw-up, then I think you could see a revived push from Democrats to remove him. I guess his Thursday press conference after NATO will be a big thing. And by the way, after the Republican convention, you can see an argument for moving to Harris right then. Right after Trump's speech, it would be a big jolt of energy on the Democratic side. Voters will have just seen Trump's parade of awfulness for days at the convention, and all of a sudden they could learn there is a choice other than Trump or Biden, someone younger, new generation of leadership speaking a different language. Right? It looks to me like that. I don't know if I don't know if it could still happen, but maybe it should. What do you think?
I mean, it's a very narrow window. Just logistically, it's a very narrow window. You're not going to likely see it during the Republican convention. Biden has shut this down, I think, at least for the next several days. And so you're really only looking at that third week, because remember, the Democratic Party, the DNC, is planning right now to have a virtual roll call and do the nomination before the convention. They might do it as early as that third week of July. That has been a date that has been floated. They have to lock that down the next couple days. So there's no reason, by the way, to do this virtual roll call. The claimed reason was because Ohio had an earlier deadline than the DNC, but Ohio actually changed the law to allow for the nominee of the party to get onto ballots in the state of Ohio. So there actually is no functional reason to have an early nomination, but the DNC is doing it anyway. And it could be as early as that week that you're talking about. So because once the nominee of the party is sort of committed, there's kind of no turning back. That's when you get into the potential legal trouble of trying to get Biden off the ballot. So if that early nomination really does go forward as soon as the third week of July, we're really not talking about a month or 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. We're talking about days here.
It sure looks like this thing is getting very close to baked. I just want to say one thing, though. I would not rule out a path for Biden still. There is an anti-MAGA majority out there in the country, and Donald Trump is capable of all kinds of things. Democratic voters have been surprising people throughout all of 2022 and 2023. I'm certainly, just to reiterate, I think we'd be better off with Harris, but if it's Biden, it's Biden, and I think the party will, really work as hard as it can to try and win. And I think there's still a way, maybe. What do you think?
I think you only have to look to the French elections, right? I mean, You saw that a far-right party that didn't really have a majority of the people could be defeated if the left and the center forms a sort of united front and says that our only interest in going into this ballot box is that Marine Le Pen doesn't become, more powerful, and that her party doesn't get the prime ministership. So you could see a similar effect here, that everyone who is not part of the MAGA movement just sort of comes together and says we have to do what we can. It doesn't matter whose name is at the top of that ticket. We're going to have to block Donald Trump from getting in and bringing forth what he's going to bring forth. So That's possible, but you need a messenger to do that. You need a messenger to make that case to the American people. So the question is, are there surrogates that can do that? Are the ads going to do that? Who is going to make that case to the American people?
Right. The bottom line is the pieces are there. The question is, can Biden put them all together? And I think people are right to have their confidence very, very shaken. But again, the pieces are there. David Dayen, thanks so much. This was a terrific discussion, man.
Thank you very much, Greg.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.